the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. She opened the earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts. Screaming white-hot flames and agony, she challenged millions of headhunters, dragging and ripping apart impossible tender moments of time, shipping vessels of history, ancient history, destroying the fabric, the godlike claw of destiny of a people with a gun, a knife, a cannon, building the hideous wall of blood called slavery.
Good morning. When Chris Cutrone, the founder of the Platypus Affiliated Society, writes an article entitled "The Future Belongs to America, So Should Greenland," wherein he writes, quote, "Trump's promise to make America great again begins with making America again. Making Greenland and Canada American is part of this initiative." He continues, "This is not imperialism, but a reminder of the empire of liberty that Thomas Jefferson declared the mission of the new United States. It is an evergreen promise. America is revolutionary or it is nothing. The United States of America liberated the world twice, 3 times with the Cold War. Its mission continues," end quote. What does this say? What does this mean? What does this signal? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they take place in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events occur. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they take place, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze these events that impact the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is, are a growing number of ex-leftists making overtures to the right as the change of government nears? What does this say? What does this mean? What does this signal? Let's get some insight from my guest. He's an independent investigative journalist and the author of 3 books, The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. And he's the author of Cheering on Trump, which you can find at Permanent Revolution. And that's the article that's the basis of this conversation. Daniel Lazare. Daniel, Happy New Year and welcome back.
Happy New Year to you too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate you joining me today. Before we get to your article, there are a couple of events taking place as we speak that I would like to quickly get your take on. One, the Justice Department releases the Trump Special Counsel report on the January 6th case. And the Washington Post reports if Donald Trump hadn't won the presidential election in November, the Justice Department would have had ample evidence to convict him at trial of trying to obstruct the 2020 election results. Special Counsel Jack Smith said in a report released early today. Dan, I have not had the opportunity to read the 137-page report, but with its release and the first paragraph of this Washington Post article, coupled with Trump now being a convicted felon who will be sworn in on Monday, there are a lot of daggers being thrown at this guy at the very last minute. Your thought, Daniel Lazare?
Yeah. I mean, Jack Smith. I think he's probably right. I mean, I can't predict how his case would have worked out, but I think it's a very good chance that he would have won a conviction and that Trump would have been sentenced if he hadn't been elected. And compared to the other cases, the hush money case involving Stormy Daniels, or the real estate case in which he was accused of inflating real estate values, even though no one he sold his apartment to really cared. I mean, those were nonsense cases. Those were BS cases. But the January 6th case was a very real case. And there's little doubt that Trump tried to subvert an election, and he should have had the book thrown at him. But he got elected instead. And the fact that Americans have elected a president who tried to overthrow an election means that, American democracy is in big trouble. So I think that Trump is going to be, his administration is going to be filled with crisis. It's going to be rocky in the extreme, and I think that the future of American democracy is hanging by a slender thread.
The second story for today: Republicans say they want to put conditions on wildfire aid to California. Leading congressional Republicans say they want to place conditions on aid for California's wildfire victims, trying to force the state to fix what one lawmaker called bad behavior on policies ranging from taxes to land management in exchange for billions of dollars in federal help to recover from a natural disaster. House Speaker Mike Johnson, the Republican from Louisiana, said yesterday, quote, there should probably be conditions on that aid, end quote, and pointed to disagreements about California's resource management and forest management mistakes. Daniel, this is the party that champions states' rights. This is the party that champions less government regulation, less government interference and involvement in the issues of state governance. This seems to be a contradiction, Daniel Lazare.
Yeah, it's a contradiction, certainly. I mean, but there's a war going on. There's a non-shooting civil war, and the Republicans, want to rub the Democrats' nose in it, and that's what they're going to do about California. I mean, the total bill, I've seen estimates as high as $150 billion. This is extraordinary, and the fires are still raging. The problem is not yet contained. But Republicans see it as a way of launching yet another salvo at the Democrats. I mean, you're absolutely right. The Republicans are no better, absolutely no better whatsoever when it comes to land use policies and these kinds of things. But they're gonna try to punish the Democrats and reap a short-term political victory. And meanwhile, conditions for Americans will continue going downhill.
One of the things that intrigues me about this debate is there is this stereotype of California being this bastion of leftist politics. And I'm from California. I'm from Sacramento, which is Northern California. And a lot of people don't realize that Southern California, the homeland of the John Birch Society, the homeland of Ronald Reagan, as Gil Scott-Heron told us regarding Richard Nixon when he left office, and the rich go to San Clemente. So a lot of those folks in the Palisades, a lot of those folks in the Hollywood Hills, they're Republicans. There's a line of demarcation, maybe it's the Imperial Valley, between the Democratic leaning North and the Republican leaning South as it relates to California. So there are a lot of Republicans that lost their homes here. There are a lot of Republicans that don't have homeowners insurance anymore because the rates went too high. So it's not a matter of just throwing darts at Democrats. A lot of Republicans are catching hell in these fires as well.
Yeah, so a lot of Republicans will be on the receiving end of those darts. You're correct, but the Republicans just want to be able to turn that anger against the Democrats, and the Democrats have got a lot to answer for. They've been running the state for the last 30 years, and things have gotten worse and worse. Land use, transportation, these are all messes. The crisis of incarceration is as bad as ever. Do you know that 900 of the 7,500 firefighters in Southern California are actually prison inmates who are working for somewhere under $1 an hour? For lunch, they get a measly bologna sandwich and an equally skimpy dinner, and they're exposed to serious danger. And they're essentially slave labor, and that's what California is using. And it's California Democrats who are using the slave labor. I mean, Kamala Harris was notorious for keeping prisoners behind bars past their release dates in order to use them for various labor projects. So this is absolutely amazing. And what we're seeing here in California is not only a natural disaster, but a social collapse. And ordinary people, of all persuasions, are suffering the consequences.
And not only are prisoners being used, but Mexican firefighters have come across the border. They tunneled under the wall and with their firefighting gear, and they're in California fighting fires. Carl Williams, thank you for that super sticker. Greatly appreciate it. And we've just really started hearing reports about what the makeup of these firefighter squadrons are. And some of them are actually coming from Mexico. Wonder what that's going to do, if anything, about this immigrant narrative. The final point before we get to your piece. Biden defends foreign policy record despite ongoing crisis. He defended his foreign policy record during his address at the State Department yesterday. He highlighted his administration's efforts in the Middle East failed and Ukraine failed, and he defended the chaotic withdrawal of the U.S. troops from Afghanistan. When I listened to a lot of what he had to say and how he was so positively framing his administration, I scratched my head and wondered, well, if things went so well during your tenure, why couldn't your vice president win? Daniel Lazare.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. I mean, the scary thing about Biden's speech is that just completely ignored reality. It's really quite amazing. He just sort of lives in a fantasy world. He really is a very old man at this point who has just lost touch with reality. I must concede one point from a U.S. perspective. Things are going quite well in the Middle East. I mean, yeah, tens of thousands of people have died. Entire societies have been devastated. But U.S. imperial fortunes are intact. We have Lebanon is broken. Hamas is essentially defeated. Syria is being recolonized, and Iran is hanging by a thread. So, yeah, that's all quite good from a U.S. imperial perspective. But it's, of course, quite horrible for all the millions of people.
For everybody else.
Yeah. So Biden's right about that. But the war in the Ukraine, I mean, this is in some ways even more dangerous. And there's no doubt that the Ukraine is losing this war. Step by step, inch by inch, day by day, they are on the retreat, and that picture is not gonna change. So the U.S. and NATO face a huge problem: is how to contain this disaster that they themselves, helped create. And I don't see any way out of it. The Ukraine is not going to capitulate. The EU is not going to capitulate, and Russia is not going to capitulate either. So unless Trump can pull a rabbit out of his hat, this war is going to go on a lot longer and grow more and more dangerous. It's really an extraordinary situation, and it all started with a U.S.-backed coup d'etat in February 2014, almost exactly 11 years ago. And things have gotten steadily worse. And so for Biden to say this is a good thing, I mean, the mind reels. It's just extraordinary.
You just mentioned NATO, and this ties tangentially to what we're about to get into with your piece. You mentioned NATO, and as Donald Trump is talking about annexing Greenland, and he's even talked about, if we got to go in and take it, we'll go in and take it. Greenland is controlled by Denmark. Denmark is a NATO country. So if Donald Trump were to use aggression towards Denmark, that would then bring in an Article 5 issue in terms of NATO, and he could then put the United States in a fight over Greenland against NATO. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, it's totally correct.
Okay.
I mean, the effect would be to destroy NATO, and I think Trump wouldn't mind doing that one.
He wouldn't mind doing that at all.
Yeah, I mean, NATO, the NATO's original head, Lord Ismay, said very famously that the purpose of NATO is to keep the Russians out, the Germans down, and the Americans in. So NATO is a device for U.S. control. But when the U.S. declares war on a NATO nation, there's nothing the alliance can do except kind of like spin in a circle and eventually fall over. This is completely extraordinary, and the Europeans have got to recognize that whatever threat is posed by Russia, the U.S. represents an equally important threat from the opposite direction. So they are really caught in between a vice. And after all, I mean, in his speech yesterday, Joe Biden, talked about how Europe is less dependent on Russian gas than ever. Well, I wonder why that is. Is that possibly because somebody blew up the Nord Stream pipeline? was it 6 Ukrainians on a 50-foot rented yacht, or was it a
yes,
U.S.
yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Was it a U.S. operation? And it's obviously the latter.
Mm-hmm.
So the Europeans face hostilities, military pressure on both fronts. And what are they going to do? The situation is completely unprecedented since the end of World War II.
Now, to your piece, Cheering on Trump, which you can find at Permanent Revolution, you open your piece as follows. When word got out last week that Chris Cutrone was writing an article about Donald Trump's threats against Canada and Greenland, it seemed reasonable to assume that the Platypus founder would open up with both barrels. After all, the Platypus Affiliated Society, with its many student clubs and discussion groups in the US, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, is broadly Marxist in orientation. So, isn't it the first task of Marxists to oppose imperialist aggression? So one might think, but one would be wrong. Daniel Lazare, who is Chris Cutrone? What is the Platypus Affiliated Society? And what motivated you to write this particular piece?
Chris Cutrone is a professor at the School of the Art Institute at Chicago. And in 2007, he founded the Platypus Society. And Platypus essentially is a collection of student clubs at a dozen or so American universities and universities in Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, as you said, which and some things about it are really quite good. They're generally Marxist in orientation. They have reading groups in which they read very ambitious, very difficult Marxist texts. They're quite enthusiastic in some ways. Very, very inspiring. And they also host. They put out a review that's published roughly 10 times a year, and they host a number of student panels in which there are often very lively, no holds barred discussions. And I have written for the review, and I have taken part in many Platypus panels. So therefore, I was shocked and maybe even a bit embarrassed when Cutrone wrote in a right-wing publication called Compact that the U.S. should indeed go ahead and seize Canada and Greenland, and moreover should dominate the rest of the Western Hemisphere as well. So the U.S. should rule from the Arctic to Tierra del Fuego. And I was shocked. I think this is an absolute scandal.
Wait a minute. For those who don't know, Tierra del Fuego is at the bottom of Argentina. So you're talking about...
I'm talking about 12,000 miles. I'm talking about 12,000 miles stretching from the North Pole or the Arctic to the Straits of Magellan at the southern end of South America. And this kind of imperial fantasy is bad enough, but to see a guy like Cutrone with a major campus following who claims to be a Marxist, although of a rather eccentric kind, to see him cheering this on, I think is really a scandal. And it's especially scandalous now that we're in the final countdown to the Trump administration, which is only 6 days away. So we should be prepared. We should be bracing ourselves, preparing to go into battle, preparing for all the hell that Trump may be raining down. And here was Cutrone saying, no, just lay back and enjoy it. And I think this is completely outrageous. And I think that I am just determined to try to expose the hollowness at Platypus's core.
And I read an interesting piece in the World Socialist website entitled "The Platypus Affiliated Society." And according to this article, Platypus wrote a letter to the International Youth and Students for Social Equality, the IYSSE, club, which is at the University of Melbourne, asking them to send students to a forum and asking them to start a chapter of the Platypus Foundation at the University of Melbourne. And the IYSSE declined, stating that Platypus is a pro-imperialist trap for students and young people. Platypus is a right-wing pro-war organization with absolutely nothing to do with Marxism or socialism. And then Owen Howell and Oscar Greenfield, who wrote this article, said that a political exposure of Platypus is important because it functions as a catchment area. It seeks to draw in students and youth interested in socialist and Marxist politics through discussion forums, which in fact serve as a gathering point for various anti-working class tendencies of the affluent upper middle class. The fundamentally reactionary character of this operation is glaringly evident in Platypus's position on the Israeli genocide in Gaza. And then I went and read Platypus's position on the genocide in Gaza and came away with, if you only read that piece, you would tend to think that these two people are correct. Your thoughts, Daniel Lazare?
This is very complicated. The IYSSE and the Socialist Equality Party, which run the WSWS, the World Socialist website, I know them. I've had a long experience with them. I'm actually a former member of a forerunner of that group, and they, believe me, they have tons and tons of skeletons in their own closet.
Okay.
And I could be happy to go into that, but it is they have an extraordinarily checkered history.
Okay, we'll take it. We'll take that point on face value for the sake of time.
Fine. And the Platypus Review has run some very good stuff that I have authored, among others, and has run some not so good stuff. But I was myself, if I was at the University of Melbourne, I would have helped them to get a student charter, because I don't want to turn my back on young people who are looking for answers and who are gathering together, and reading these texts and discussing these issues, and are trying to figure out the world. I don't want to tell them to go jump in a lake because of something that Chris Cutrone wrote about the Israel-Palestine situation that isn't up to the WSWS's standards, even though some of the stuff they've written has been absolutely atrocious. So I'm loath to turn my back on young people who are reading, studying, debating, and trying to figure out what to do. But unfortunately, I think that Cutrone has gone just way, way too far. I mean, it's one thing to offer up some eccentric opinions. It's quite another to cheer Trump's imperial aggression on and to call for more. I mean, there are limits. And I think that Cutrone has really overstepped them. And this is a real scandal. And I think that as Trump prepares to take office, a lot of leftists are trying to put the best face on things. And you can understand why. I mean, the Democrats have been so awful, and Trump has occasionally landed some good ones. I mean, Trump, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris can't get enough of Liz Cheney, a really scary hawk. And Trump amazingly, called her out as a chicken hawk who's happy to call for war from the comfort of Washington, D.C., while the sons and daughters of the working class actually have to go, wading through the muck and the mire. So at moments like that, we find ourselves, shaking our heads and saying, like, no, my God, the Democrats are so bad that Trump actually winds up looking good. But the fact is that when Trump takes over, there's no doubt that he is a right-wing authoritarian who, if he does what he says he's going to do, there will be extraordinary consequences. Millions of people could be deported. Their lives could be their lives will be destroyed. The results could be horrendous, tragic, criminal. His threats to level Gaza, to bomb Iran, these are all extraordinary. Now, no one knows. We're all trapped in the mind of Trump, so no one knows whether he'll go through with it or not. But I think it's worth taking these threats very seriously, and we have to mobilize against them.
Before we get deeper into the issue with where the left is and where the left is headed, which is really, I think, the crux of your piece, you just said something that prompted this thought. You said that Cutrone has now gone way, way too far. And you talked about supporting the Platypus Society because it my words, not yours, but I think this is the point. It assists students and younger people that are looking for answers. And as a college professor, that's my job. That's my calling. That's why I'm in the classroom. Where in all of this discussion about sanctioning college campuses in their support of the Palestinians, never heard anybody talking about the Platypus Society running them off of campuses, and they're a Marxist-based organization. One would have thought these right-wing ideologues that were running around with torches and pitchforks trying to get Palestinian sympathizers off of American campuses would have also been targeting organizations like the Platypus. Am I connecting wrong dots here and asking the wrong question?
No, I think you're asking a perfectly reasonable question.
Okay.
It's hard. The timing is hard to figure out. I mean, Trump at this point is training his guns on the Democrats, Kamala Harris, Newsom in California, et cetera, et cetera. So he's not, for the moment, going after Marxists, going after radical leftists. But
wait a minute. These weren't Trumpian forces that were attacking Palestinian and Jewish organizations that were supporting Palestine. These were Biden people. These were folks during the Biden administration that were on the attack, not the so-called ultra right. These were, and this I think takes us into your piece. These were those on the left.
Yeah, that's so true. But remember those congressional hearings where the presidents of Columbia,
right,
and Pennsylvania and Harvard were writhing in discomfort under as they were attacked by I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. Who is the Republican from upstate New York?
Right.
Who was a fierce Trumper.
Yes.
And who actually was quite adept. And so she made them squirm, and then they went home and read the riot act to these kids who were protesting these atrocious Israeli actions in Gaza.
And Michael Johnson, the Speaker of the House, went to Columbia, I think, and stood on the steps. But just to finish my thought there, the Democrats did not rally behind them and support them. The Democrats, for the most part, went along with the flow.
Oh, totally.
Okay.
The Democrats. The Democrats are. That's really. The Democrats and Republicans are in a fierce competition to see who can be more slavish to the Zionists. There's no doubt about that at all. There is a very tiny Democratic left wing which does hesitate to a degree and tries to be more balanced in its approach in the most minimal sense. By the way, let me just emphasize. But 9/10 of the Democrats and 110% of the Republicans are fiercely pro-Israel, and as far as
Mhm.
they're concerned, whatever Netanyahu does is just fine with them. They don't care how many people he kills or how many buildings he levels. They can just keep on going for as long as he wants, as far as they're concerned. But the state as a whole is increasingly repressive. There's a very interesting comparison between the apartheid protests of the 1980s
Mhm.
and the anti-Zionist protests of the 2020s.
Mhm.
The university administrations were entirely supportive of the first, because the U.S. Foreign policy did not object. It was embarrassed by the apartheid regime in South Africa, and it was quite open to a changeover as long as it was pro-capitalist and pro-Western. But in the case of the Gaza protests, U.S. foreign policy is thoroughly behind Israel. And so therefore, these protesters got in trouble because they dared to challenge U.S. imperial policy at its most sensitive point. So that's what really happened. And the Republicans read the Riot Act to the to these liberal university administrators, who then promptly went home and read the Riot Act to the protesters. So in this case, there's no question that the state as a whole is increasingly repressive.
And Shelley H., thank you so much for that super sticker. Greatly appreciated. So in your piece, you write, not that Cutrone is entirely unique. A growing number of ex-leftists are making overtures to the right as the change of government nears. With funding by George Soros and Peter Thiel, Compact, the publication that ran Cutrone's piece, has begun publishing erstwhile leftists who now argue on behalf of RFK Jr. and Kash Patel, the hard-right hitman who Trump has named to head the FBI. Dan, is this the real point, and is this the real fear?
Yeah. Like this is the real issue here. The real issue is that certain segments of the left, who are not without influence, are essentially cozying up to Trump, and the process is quite understandable. I mean, RFK takes on the pharmaceutical companies, and so therefore they're quite happy to see it. I mean, I think RFK's anti-vax line is utterly insane, but bashing Fauci is now a popular sport on certain parts of the left. And Kash Patel, I mean, you remember Leon back in in 2017, I think it was, or 2018, when Kash Patel was a Republican staffer on the House Intelligence Committee. And he actually wrote a decent report, believe it or not, exposing FBI lies on a FISA application that for a warrant against a Trump campaign advisor. You and I remember you and I discussed this issue back then. And ironically, the Patel report was not bad at all, whereas the Democratic report, which was written by Adam Schiff, who's now a California senator, was a pack of lies from start to finish. So therefore, a lot of leftists remember this. A lot of leftists, have a soft spot for Kash Patel and look forward to him, sort of shaking up the FBI, whose behavior during Russiagate was absolutely outrageous. Now, but the problem is that Kash Patel is being put in there as a hitman for Trump. And his job is to turn the FBI into an agency for political retribution. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand anything. This is very dangerous, because that FBI will not only go after Democrats, it'll sooner rather than later will go against leftists as well. This is, the historical record is quite clear. So essentially, these leftists, these erstwhile leftists, are feeding ammunition, to the forces that will be turning their guns against them. It's foolhardy in the extreme, and yet people are falling for it.
Because how much of this is focused on personal gain as opposed to public service? When I hear, you just laid very clearly out Kash Patel's report, very, very well written report. Now he's flipped on himself. He's sold himself out to Trump. You've got Lindsey Graham telling us that Donald Trump is a self-serving, narcissistic, egotistical bigot. Now he has sold himself out. Ted Cruz has sold out. Lil Marco. All of these guys that have J.D. Vance compared Donald Trump to Hitler. And now he's standing next to Hitler as second in command. What are you going to tell me, J.D. Vance? Sieg Heil? Is that what you're going to tell me now? So, and even on the Democrat side, you've got Chuck Schumer saying, well, okay, Donald, we can talk about changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America if you agree to work with us on these other issues. Now, sarcasm that might be, but Chuck Schumer should be standing there saying, under no circumstances are we going to tolerate foolishness like this. But he's talking to the wrong people. He's talking to Donald Trump instead of talking to the American people. Dan Lazare.
The corruption that extends across the entire political class is extraordinary. I mean, Adam Schiff, a few years ago was calling Trump a Russian agent. Now he says he's willing to work with him. I mean, what does this mean? He's no longer a Russian agent, or maybe Adam Schiff is a Russian agent as well. I mean, this is just ridiculous. These people are feathering their own nest. J.D. Vance wants to be president in 2028. That's clearly what he has on his mind. And it's not an impossible goal. He may actually pull it off. I mean, Kash Patel wants to be a new ultra-right J. Edgar Hoover. And who knows, he may actually do it. And so it goes on and on. I mean, Trump essentially has turned around a Republican losing streak that had gone on for what, more than 30 years. Republicans had not, with one exception, Republicans had not won the popular vote since 1992. Republican presidential candidates. And Trump, while just shy of winning the popular vote, he got 49.8%. He did get a plurality this time. So as far as Republicans are concerned, he is their rescuer. He walks on water. He turns water into wine. And so therefore, whatever he does, they will go along with. And if he climbs in power, if he wins out, then they want to be on the winning side too. And so does Adam Schiff. I mean, Adam Schiff wants to be reelected 6 years from now, and therefore he wants to get along with Trump and talk, and maybe J.D. Vance after him, and make deals and talk turkey and sit down at political dinners and laugh and chap and clap one another on the back. I mean, Schiff wants to show that he's a good old boy. He can get along with Trump like everyone else. And the end will be, he hopes will be good business for Adam Schiff. And so, it's a hopelessly corrupt political class and a hopelessly dysfunctional political system, which is just wreaking havoc in terms of the broad working class population.
So I think you've just answered this question, but I'll ask you to elaborate a little further in that. What does Cutrone's article signal? I wrote a piece a while ago entitled "The Dangers of Binary Politics." and the point of the or in fact, the dangers of binary politics for the African American community, because during the election, the argument was very clear. You only have two options. You either have Donald Trump or you have Joe Biden. And if you're in the Black community, there is no option. The only option is Joe Biden. I was arguing now is the time to actually look at other options. So what I hear, or what I took, one of the things that I took away from your article is that Cutrone and those of his ilk are locked into binary thought, that now, as former leftists, their only option is Trump, instead of creating another option, another viable option, which is actually out there. Daniel Lazare.
Yeah, I think that I think Cutrone is making the mistake that he's sort of bowing to what he thinks is reality, and reality is whatever seems to be happening at the moment. And as a Marxist, Cutrone, I mean, if there's one thing that Marx taught, it is that reality is ever changing, ever surprising, ever at war with itself. So Trump seems to be all powerful now, and therefore, from a certain perspective, it makes sense to sort of to work with him. Things are going to change very, very fast. This country is heading into a really rocky period. The country is in crisis. The political system is in crisis. An event like the fires in Los Angeles are triggering a kind of verbal war. In which Democrats, want to use the fires in order to punish and which Republicans want to use the fires to punish their Democratic opponents. It's extraordinary. But I think that what Cutrone has got to understand is that things will be very different in a short period of time. That Trump is heading for crisis, heading for trouble, and he'll look and his fortunes are going to encounter tough going in the months ahead. The economy, I'm convinced, is very unstable, and if there is a crisis, an economic crisis, the choice will be Wall Street or the working class, and you and I know perfectly well which choice Trump will make. But the question is, what will the working class do in response?
You write, this presents Platypus members with a choice. Do they sit back and watch as Cutrone transforms Platypus into the left wing of Trumpism, or do they mobilize against the new administration by repudiating Cutrone's views as forcefully as possible? The options are clear. Fight Trump or lose themselves in increasingly arid discussions as the right-wing drive intensifies outside the classroom windows. I would say, that this is not limited to Platypus and Cutrone, that this is really the question for not only the left, this is the question for America.
Yeah, I mean, no one knows what to do. I think I know what to do, but the mass of the population doesn't know what to do. It's turned its back on the Democrats for good reason. Workers have been brutally punished by the inflationary wave that Joe Biden helped trigger. It's been extraordinary. There is a major housing crisis. People can't find any place to live because housing costs are just out of sight. It's extraordinary. This is turning into a nightmare for tens of millions of Americans, and they're very angry, as they should be. So, for the time being, they're turning towards Trump, but this is not going to last. This is not going to last because Trump is what Trump's collective Trump's cabinet is worth collectively close to $1 trillion at this point. I mean, he's assembling a cabinet of the richest people in the country, and all they care about is the stock market going up and up and up. So working class people are not going to put up with this. They're going to have to fight back. I don't know when that'll happen. I don't know exactly the chemistry that will make it occur, but I am quite certain that at some point there will be working class resistance. And when that happens, then suddenly it's a whole new ballgame. I mean, the left has been down in the dumps for decades. But I really think that opportunities are opening up, because I think that the Trump crisis will intensify.
You just said you don't know the chemistry that will cause this to occur, and one of the viewers, U.S. Navy vet, says Vance flipped on J6ers, and because just yesterday I heard Vance talking about, well, if they actually committed violent crime in the Capitol, they should not be pardoned. Donald Trump, of course, ran on, the first thing I'm going to do is pardon these people. If so, could the January 6th pardon issue, if Trump does not live up to his promise to pardon all these people, could that be one of the elements, one of the chemical elements in the equation or in the formula that starts to create this chasm?
Yeah, I mean, the things are very unstable. So therefore, any spark, like in Southern California, can start the inferno raging. I mean, Trump has vowed to pardon all J6ers. This is itself is extraordinarily dangerous. It'll feed a small but growing fascist movement in the country. But then, if he goes back on his word, he may anger those fascists all the more and excite them to even greater and greater actions. So the result will be greater turbulence, heightened contradictions, greater crisis, and more instability. I mean, Trump is in a honeymoon period at this time. I mean, he can say anything he wants, and he can say with perfect freedom because he knows it doesn't matter. So he can talk about leveling Gaza, attacking Iran, doing whatever he wants, because so far he's not yet in office. But in 6 short days, he will be in office, and at that point, the you-know-what will hit the fan. And the J6 question is could be part of that process. Very likely will be part of the process, because if he frees these people, the ramifications will be extraordinary across the political spectrum. But he's facing other problems as well. He's facing renewed inflation. If Trump leans on the Fed to cut interest rates, as he has said he will do, he will very possibly, very likely, reignite inflation, which will anger American workers all the more. We don't know what's going to happen in the Ukraine, but that could spin out of control very easily. I mean, things, as I said, are really rocky, really, really rocky. And Trump is riding high for the moment, but things are going to change very soon. And I think we should brace ourselves for the stormy period we're about to enter.
And I don't say this to say you're wrong, but in looking back, and I'm not going to come back and say, but Daniel, you're wrong. But looking back at history, we've had these conversations about Trump before. When he came on the scene and was talking about Mexicans coming across the border and they're raping your kids and they're doing all the crap that he said they were doing, that's beyond the pale. There's no way in the world that this guy can survive. I fell victim to the statements out of what I call the Trump racist hate fest 2024 at Madison Square Garden, where Puerto Rico is a an island of garbage in the Pacific. And I said, oh my God, that's going to outrage Puerto Rican Americans to such a degree that they are going to be the difference makers here. It seems as though we no matter what he says, now he's talking about annexing Greenland, changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico. He's talking about making Canada the 51st state. And once again, we're saying that's beyond the pale. But there never seems to be a pale with Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's really true. That's definitely true. But I mean, Trump,
there's no pale until you go beyond the pale.
Yeah, but Trump is an extraordinary figure. In 2011, Barack Obama made a fool of him at the White House Correspondents' Dinner by poking fun of him and the whole Birthergate controversy that Trump was trying to fuel, and it looked like Trump was finished. He was a laughingstock. But then 4 years later, he hit the campaign trail, and something changed, something clicked, and people. It's not that they were upset about his racial provocations or his sexual provocations or whatever. They were so sick and tired of this woke culture that the Democrats were pushing, even as they waged war in the Ukraine, that they were sort of happy to see somebody challenge this kind of liberal culture head on. And so Trump started winning points. He lost the popular vote in 2016, but he won the popular vote in 2024, and that was a hell of a comeback. And he also, by the way, benefited from a huge swing among Hispanics and a strong swing among African Americans, especially Black men. Now, what that means, that liberals find that all quite perplexing. But number one is that everybody was willing at this point to write Trump off, to say he's just kidding. He's just grandpa spouting off at Thanksgiving dinner, etc. But what they really had on their mind was inflation, which was punishing them brutally, and they wanted somebody to fix it. And so if Trump therefore made crude jokes about it wasn't Trump himself, it was a stand-up comic who the Republicans hired to do a performance at this Madison Square Garden event. But if they make some kind of disgusting, disgraceful joke about Puerto Ricans, everyone shrugged their shoulders and because they had more serious things, as they saw, to worry about, and that was inflation. And inflation is a killer. Believe me, every time I go to the supermarket and buy some eggs, or a bottle of milk, I just I'm left reeling, because every week it goes up and up and up.
And my gauge is the price of tomatoes. And when you're paying $3.50 a pound for a large tomato, that's frightening. You mentioned Trump. You said, I'll paraphrase, and I can't remember exactly what you said, but your point was something happened with Trump. And what I would suggest, and I'll just limit it to the 2024 election, we all know that Trump is the consummate marketeer. There are a lot of things you can say about Donald Trump, a lot of adjectives you can use that are true. Again, Lindsey Graham told us very, very clearly, very succinctly, he's a race-baiting, xenophobic bigot. Can't argue that point. But he's a consummate marketeer. And when you look at 2024 in the campaign, he never abandoned his base. You know as well as I, in the primaries, you tacked if you're a Democrat left, If you're a Republican, you tacked right. And then for the general election, you moved to the center to bring in the country. Trump didn't do that. He stayed with his base. The Democrats abandoned their base and chased the Cheneys. Kamala Harris was looking at the wrong Liz. Instead of Liz Cheney, she should have been looking at Elizabeth Warren. Instead of embracing Dick Cheney, she should have been embracing what's the old guy from Vermont? What's his name? Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders. So they made phenomenal tactical mistakes. The Democrats made phenomenal tactical mistakes by abandoning their base, not allowing a representative of the Palestinians to speak at the. You can't win Michigan like that. So, Daniel Lazare.
Look, to speak, to say a word in behalf of poor Kamala.
Careful.
Before the election, I read in the New York Times that she was running the best campaign ever. Mm-hmm. Everyone agreed she was just doing a stupendous job. She was putting those celebrities out there. She was having interviews with Oprah. There were rock concerts in her behalf. The New York Times said she was just doing it all quite perfectly. And then after the election, everyone said the opposite. Those celebrities were a mistake. The Oprah interview was a disaster. She didn't have a clear line. She backtracked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I view Trump's victory as less a victory than a systemic collapse.
I agree with you.
We've had 30 years of gridlock in this on Capitol Hill. We've had 2 stolen elections, 1 attempted coup d'etat, endless scandals, et cetera, partisan warfare of the most poisonous kind. And I think that what we're seeing is this ancient structure, which dates from 1787, if you can believe it, is now crumbling. And I think that Trump represents that collapse. He personifies that collapse. I mean, this guy, after all, is a reality TV star, a failed real estate developer turned reality TV star who has probably never read a single book from cover to cover in his entire life, and he somehow is going to turn things around. I mean, it's a complete joke, and he will be in trouble. I am absolutely confident. In a matter of weeks, of months, if not weeks.
And just to put a final point on what you said about the New York Times I was one of the few, while the New York Times was extolling the virtues of Kamala Harris and her Oprah interview and the concerts, I was one of very few saying she's not saying anything. There's you were. And if you remember, I was one who was saying that she was not doing a bad job. This is back in July and August. You and I were going at this, and I kept saying she's not saying anything. And as people were going to the grocery store paying $3.50 a pound for tomatoes, she wasn't saying anything. And now Joe Biden, yesterday at the Department of State, is championing his cause, rewriting history. And that takes us back to the point I asked you at the topic of this conversation. Joe, if you did such a great job, why couldn't your vice president carry the torch into 2025? And with that, Daniel Lazare, what are the 2 or 3 things that you want this audience to take away from this conversation about Mr. Cutrone, about the Platypus organization, the Platypus Society, and the bigger picture? Not because I think you were using the Platypus Society as a clear example of what's happened to the left.
My message is, don't sell your birthright for a mess of pottage. In other words, the fight is just beginning. Stay in it. Don't waver. Don't cheer on Trump. Don't make deals. Don't sell out, but stand firm. I'm really quite serious. Stand firm. The battle is just getting underway.
But what is apparent to me is we have to move away from this paradigm of binary thinking, because the left, because the Democratic Party as a party is not going to save you. They are not the cavalry. You're going to have to, well, I don't want people to think I'm advocating violence. In the Western movie context, you're going to have to pick up your rifle and you're going to have to save the farm.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as a socialist, I believe in independent working class action. I believe the workers must mobilize, as workers. I think the Democrats are as equally dangerous at this point as the Republicans. We can't fall into that trap. We can't fall into the trap of celebrating Liz Cheney. I mean, a woman who never saw a country she didn't want to invade. We can't cheer on Trump's saber rattling.
Women who never saw a Trump piece of legislation she didn't vote for because she voted with him 98% of the time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there were 2% that she didn't like, but you get my point.
Workers, we just can't do this. Workers can't do this. They've got to fight on their own, and they've got to fight for socialism. And things in this country are pitching downhill at an accelerating pace, and the only force capable of turning that around is the working class.
Daniel Lazare, again, Happy New Year to you, Dan. As always, thank you so much for giving us time today. And folks, he's an independent investigative journalist. He's the author of 3 books, The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. You can find his most recent piece, Cheering on Trump, which I strongly suggest that you read. You can find it at Permanent Revolution. Daniel Lazare, really appreciate it, man. Look forward to having you back.
Thanks so much.
Hey, folks, we need to get to 10,000. We need to get to 10,000 viewers. Only you can help us do that. As I say all the time, we're here for you, but we can't do this without you. Please, follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show. We're really trying to get to 10,000. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. There will be a new episode tomorrow. Follow us on social media. You'll find all the links below in the show description. Remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful, blessed day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.